The Baltimore Ravens have replaced a controversial veteran with an underrated signing. We instantly react to the Ravens signing Chidobe Awuzie and so much more coming up next on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, and we are here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here. It's an instant reaction edition of the show here on Tuesday, right around 5:30 p.m. Eastern time, and making Locked On Ravens a part of your day, your first listen of the day. Or maybe this is your second listen after you already watched and listened to our episode this morning. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms, including in video form on YouTube. You can like and subscribe to the channel over there, or in audio form where you can follow along and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens coverage, and we go live after every piece of Ravens big news like this one as well. It's after every single Ravens game too. I'll tell you, the Ravens just love to make moves when I'm doing stuff. It just is what it is. I was driving down to the studio to do the Ryan Ripken show when this news broke. Obviously did that, came back, and that was a whole whirlwind. But we're here now reacting to it. Justin, appreciate you checking in. Carla, welcome in. Ravens 76 Be More. You're in here all the time. Appreciate you as always. And again, if you're here with us live, be sure to share your thoughts on Chidobe Awuzie, the signing that the Ravens made. We're going to dive into all that. We're going to talk about, first of all, how replacing him, Brandon Stephens, with Chidobe Awuzie is a great move for Baltimore. While it's not the biggest move ever, I do think it's a bigger move than people are making it out to be for multiple reasons. We'll talk about the outlook on Baltimore's cornerback room, because I think this does have implications for a young corner in that room. And then finally, let's talk about what's next and how this actually impacts Baltimore's draft strategy as well. Here with us live or in the comments on YouTube or just listening in audio form, be sure you tell me where you're tuning in from. I love the community we've built over here on Locked On Ravens. And I think that, again, as we gear up for the draft, which is sneaking up on us, the Ravens are continuing to build out their roster. So let's just get into it here. Breaking news. Well, breaking news at about 1:15. The Ravens signed Chidobe Awuzie. It is a minimum deal. Chidobe Awuzie, initial first reaction from me, he is a better player than a minimum contract guy. Now, I know the health and the injury history, which we'll get into, that is somewhat of a concern. But honestly, at least in my opinion, the fact that Tennessee owes him $7.5 million still from the deal that he signed with them last offseason, he was a cap casualty. It made sense for him to sign a deal with a team that he felt would be a good fit. I feel like Baltimore is that team, and he's someone that I think can come in. And again, he's not going to be asked to be this number one corner. You have Marlon Humphrey, you have Nate Wiggins. People were talking about, okay, who on the market is available? You know, we were talking about names like, could they maybe bring a Trey White back, or are they going to sign a Rashod Douglas? There were options for Baltimore, but I think Chidobe Awuzie is a little bit of a higher risk with some high reward upside if he can get back to how he was playing, particularly in Cincinnati. Now, that's been kind of the issue, and Ingraven says it best. Ingraven is the man, by the way, King of Ravens YouTube, and I know he's humble about it, but I'm just going to put it out there. You're going to let me say it, Ingraven, because it's true. He says low-risk player, physical corner, not a ball hawk, but doesn't need to be. Upgrade from B. Steve, good move, right? That's what I'm saying here, Ingraven. I 100% agree with you. Now, I agree, man. Look, if they had put me out there next to Marlon and Nate, I'm just telling you, it would have been scary hours for Baltimore. I have that instinct ability out there at corner. But the fact that you're getting it, and John asked contract details, it's a minimum deal. It's not like you're paying them 1 year, $5 million. It's not like you're paying them 1 year, $8 million or something along those lines. This is a minimum contract. Now, we don't know specifics of what it looks like, and Ingraven in the house with us. I'll always appreciate Ingraven being in here. But again, this is the low risk part of it. It's not like a Jair Alexander where, let's say they traded for him and that base salary is up there towards near $20 million. Jair is a better player, don't get me wrong, than Chidobe Awuzie. But is there a need for Baltimore to be paying Jair Alexander $16 to $18 million base salary per season, or Chidobe Awuzie, who we know can be a really good player, but unfortunately the injury history, and we'll get into that, our friends over at Draft Shark, I use them for the injury history type deal here. The ACL tear is what a lot of people are talking about. That happened in 2022. He was still with Cincinnati, spent one more year in Cincinnati after that, and obviously went to Tennessee, signed a 3-year, $36 million contract, but he got injured again in Tennessee. I mean, the thing with Awuzie, and you just look at if you just want to look at the basic box score stats here, he's been up and down in terms of his availability over the course of his career. It's no secret about that one of the risks you're taking in signing Chidobe Awuzie, and depending on the role you're going to give him, is the injury history. He played in just 8 games last year for Tennessee. 2022, obviously, we mentioned the ACL, played in 8 games then. 2020 also played in 8 games. So you're sensing a pattern here almost, where first couple years of his career, he has actually only played in 1 fully healthy season. He came in the league in 2017. He was a Dallas draft pick. He's only played in 1 fully healthy season. That was in 2019. So if you honestly want to look at 2019 and beyond, you have 16-8, 14-8, 15-8. So, hey, maybe we're on pace for 17 now in 2025 based off of the pattern there. But that is something you have to keep in mind. But this is what we talked about with DeAndre Hopkins as well, who has some injury problems of his own over the past 4 seasons, well, 3 out of the last 4 years. You're not bringing him in to be your top guy. You're not relying on him to say, okay, if Chidobe Awuzie gets injured, okay, your season's done at the corner position. That's not the case. Him being your number 3 cornerback, I think, is a very good thing, because I think him on the outside, he can be physical. He has experience going up in practice against Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Obviously, Jamar's gotten the better of him in some, and Chidobe has gotten the better of Jamar in some. To me, it just makes a lot of sense, because I think when you look at it, yes, I would have loved Jair Alexander back. I wish. I just would have loved him in Baltimore. Maybe a higher profile corner addition. But what this also does, and we talked about this when the Ravens re-signed Ronnie Stanley, and we'll get into this a little bit more in the final part of the show when we talk about draft implications here. The Ravens now, we knew they needed a cornerback. They could have also gone into the year with TJ Tampa, and we'll talk about that in the second part of the show. But your top 4 corners now being Marlon Humphrey, Nate Wiggins, Chidobe Awuzie, and TJ Tampa, I like that room, and it still gives them ways and avenues to sign either another vet. I see Callie here saying, I still want Asante Samuel Jr. I think if he gets a low contract, that's a high reward signing. I know he only really had the 1 great year, but he's someone that could be an option. But again, what I think, and George says it here, it's just depth. But I think it's a big depth move. Does that mean it's a big move in the grand scheme of things? Is this a Jair Alexander type trade big move? No. But when you talk about Brandon Stephens and what he was bringing to the table for the Ravens, I think that you get someone with a higher floor, assuming he's healthy, than Brandon Stephens. I think overall Stephens probably has the higher ceiling. We saw that in 2023. But for a Ravens team that's trying to compete this year, trying to win a Super Bowl this year, you cannot have a guy like Brandon Stephens, or just anyone for that matter, getting picked on the way that Brandon Stephens was. It can't happen, because if it does, obviously we saw that can be detrimental to your game plan. It can ruin games. And one thing that Chidobe Awuzie does do well is he gets his head around for the football. Does that sound like a foreign concept to anybody? I know if you're talking about Brandon Stephens, it does. So a guy that just has the awareness to get his head around for the ball, even that can cause pass breakups. Just the awareness to say, hey, the ball's coming here, reading the wide receiver, right? That's an art. Some guys are better at it than others. Brandon Stephens was not. Is this the biggest upgrade in the world over Brandon Stephens? No, it's not. In the grand scheme of things, when you talk about Stephens and his upside versus the low floor versus Awuzie's higher floor but probably lower ceiling, it's not a push. I still think it's an upgrade. But regardless of if Stephens came back or not, this was going to be Nate Wiggins' spot next to Marlon Humphrey. When we heard Zach Ward talk about it on the lounge with Ryan Mick and Garrett Downing, they want Nate. It seems very clear. They want Nate to be an 100% of snaps type of guy. They want that tandem of Marlon Humphrey and whether they kick Marlon inside. And I think that they're going to, again, move guys around like Marlon, move guys around like Kyle Hamilton. But at a minimum contract price, being a cornerback 3, not 1, not 2, cornerback 3. That to me is a good move. I get that it's not the flashy name like Jair Alexander. I get that it's a veteran who does have injury issues. I get that, the narrative some people are running with is, oh, another bargain bin thing from Eric DeCosta. I think that if he can stay healthy, he has the potential to be that piece where, again, we've seen 3 corner rotations be very valuable in Baltimore over the years. Even if you want recent examples, Jimmy Smith, Brandon Carr, Marlon Humphrey. Then Brandon Carr leaves and you throw in Marcus Peters into there. So then it was Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, and Jimmy Smith. Obviously, last year they had hoped that Brandon Stevens would have been better, but they used Nate Wiggins, Marlon Humphrey, and Brandon Stevens together in tandem. And now you have the option of TJ Tampa. I see people talking about him here in the chat. That's going to be a really intriguing part of this as well, too, because they could have realistically gone into the year with TJ Tampa as a number 3 corner. I wouldn't have done that. I would, if push came to shove, I would have felt okay, but not great about that. But having TJ Tampa as your 4, I think that's what helps here. And plus, another thing, and I see people talking about it as well. Look, Ravens 76B More brings it up here. You got to deal in this AFC North division. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, George Pickens, DK Metcalf, Jerry Jeudy came on late for Cleveland. You have star wide receivers left and right. Now, the Ravens have star corners in Marlon Humphrey and Nate Wiggins, but you also have to factor in, this is something I don't think I do enough, and I really try to, but I want to look at it from the perspective of, and knock on wood, no injuries happen for the Ravens this season. I know it's unrealistic because, it's football. Injuries are going to happen. But what if Marlon Humphrey or Nate Wiggins goes down? And all of a sudden, let's say Awuzie wasn't a member of the Ravens, would you have felt comfortable with TJ Tampa all of a sudden becoming your number 2 corner? And depending on how the draft goes, a rookie becoming your number 3 and having them play heavy snaps, that would have been difficult. Now with Chidobe Awuzie in, if Nate Wiggins has to miss a month, or if Marlon Humphrey goes down for a couple weeks, I think you feel better about Wiggins Awuzie or Humphrey Awuzie than you would with TJ Tampa. And that's nothing against TJ Tampa. I want to make this clear. It's nothing against TJ Tampa. I think he's a very talented player. I expect him to have a breakout of his own this season when he does get opportunities. But I think it just gives you the veterans, not stopgap, but I guess it's almost like the shield, the veteran shield for TJ Tampa, where if it's almost like Trenton Simpson last year, this is kind of, I'm not reaching, but I think it does have merit. Trenton Simpson, the Ravens went all in essentially on having Trenton Simpson be their guy last year at inside linebacker next to Roquan. It didn't work out. And Baltimore had to scramble around with Malik Harrison, Chris Board, trying to find new and innovative ways to say, all right, Trenton can't play right now. Who is it going to be? With Awuzie, that is what I wish they had last year at inside linebacker, which is a veteran option that could come in and produce. Now, Chris Board had some great games. Malik Harrison was up and down, but he had his moments also. But Awuzie is a guy that can come in and really make an impact, and I think that's the really important part here, where it doesn't have to be this like corner 1. He needs 10 interceptions and top-rated corner in the league. But I think that at the end of the day, he's someone that is a 3rd corner. It's a low-risk, somewhat high-reward move. I'm not going to get mad at that for the Ravens at all. Coming up in the second part of the show, we'll talk about what this does mean for the other corners on the Ravens roster, including TJ Tampa and some others. Stay tuned. We got a lot coming your way on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel's giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. Tournament games are happening almost every day, and there's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Back here on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher here with you, live reacting to the Ravens signing Chidobe Awuzie, depth piece for Baltimore cornerback. He replaces Brandon Stevens. I do believe this is their vet corner addition. Not that they can't add another one, but I think that for depth purposes, it works. We're reacting to it, a couple hours after the fact. Again, as I mentioned at the top of the show, the Ravens love doing things when I'm busy this offseason. I think every single move from the outside they've made, actually even their move, like re-signing Ron Stanley, I was doing something every single time. So we're here, we're talking about it. Appreciate everybody for being here, whether you're live with us on YouTube or if you're watching back after the fact, if you're listening to the show here. Really appreciate all the communities we have built up here on Locked On Ravens. Let's do a grade thing. If you're live with us, if you're watching after the fact on YouTube or just listening to us, let's put a grade. How would you grade the Ravens signing of Chidobe Awuzie? A, B, C, D, F. How would you grade it? I think I'm going to give it a B+. I'm going to give it a B+. I think that for me, Chidobe Awuzie is somebody that is not going to come in and be your savior on defense. That's not what they are expecting him to do, and it shouldn't be that way. But I'm not going to also look at this and say, oh, yeah, this is a terrible move because there are other options. There really weren't that many other options available, for being honest. I mean, let's look. We'll do it quickly here. I'm going to look at cornerback free agents, and we're going to just take a look down at who's still available on the market and see if we would have favored any of these guys over Chidobe Awuzie. There really aren't that many others that are available, in my opinion. I know a lot of guys have, found ways to get on other teams and have impacts, or they will have impacts, but here are the options. James Bradbury, who I think, honestly, at this point in his career is more of a safety. Kendall Fuller, Rasul Douglas, Stephon Gilmore, Mike Hilton could be a slot option. TJ Henderson, Shaquille Griffin, Trey White, who we talked about, Michael Davis, Emmanuel Mosley, Arthur Millette, who obviously the Ravens cut, Asante Samuel Jr., who we've talked about, Cam Sutton. Maybe they bring back Daryl Worley for the 15th time. Eli Apple, tell you right now, Chidobe Awuzie is better than Eli Apple. I think a lot of people are better than. So again, like all of this, out of all these players, I would have loved Stephon Gilmore. I think Rasul Douglas would have been cool. Mike Hilton's my favorite slot guy in the league. I think he would have been awesome. Trey White, I still think they bring Trey White back, in my opinion. I just think that, again, and I see we got a lot of Bs, B+, Bs, like it's a low-risk move. And Tyler brings up, rather Asante or Rasul, but they're going to cost a pretty penny, or at least more than Chidobe Awuzie did. Awuzie is going to be 30 years old by the time the season starts, so it's not like he is, a 27-year-old could get rewarded with. There are still options for him. If he has a great year with Baltimore, all of a sudden you're taking a guy that did not cost a comp pick because he was a cap casualty, and he becomes a guy that you could get a 4th or a 5th round comp pick from. It was a 2nd round pick of Dallas back in 2017. He's not this young player, but that, to me, I think is a good thing because he has experience. He and Marlon can be the vets in that room. And if it is Trey White that comes back as well, I think you have 3 solid options there. Because let's just look at Baltimore's cornerback room right now overall, because we know the top 4. We know the top 4 is Marlon Humphrey, Nate Wiggins, Chidobe Awuzie, and TJ Tampa. Other than that, Jalen Armour-Davis is a big question mark for them this year, and that's it. You literally have 5 guys. Now, I'm not putting all my eggs in a Jalen Armour-Davis basket. I don't think anybody should, if we're being honest. But that's why I think 6 cornerbacks, maybe 7. So let's just say the first 5 are going to make the roster. I don't know if Jalen Armour-Davis makes it. Honestly, if he doesn't have a great preseason, I could see him being let go. But let's say they keep 7 cornerbacks. That still gives you a room, or the room, to go out there and either bring back Trey White. See, we got Ravens talking a house. Sam's talking Jair Alexander. He knows what I want next. He knows what he wants next. We talked about it, and Sam's going to come on in a couple of days, and we're going to have a conversation about whether Jair still makes sense or not. Because if they keep 7 corners, hey, Chidobe Awuzie. But I think if we're being honest, and Sam, I would love it, I know, but I don't see it anymore. It was a beautiful thing while we were talking about it, but I think the fan base, and honestly, the fan base was a lot more split on it than I expected them to. In a trade, obviously, it would be too much money, but that's the thing where with Mark Andrews having his roster bonus guaranteed, they're going to have to find creative ways like they did with Michael Pierce to free up cap space, to figure out how to get not only their draft class under, but we also know they're going to have some undrafted guys that make the roster. We know they'd like to bring in a couple million or maybe even not that much, but just a little bit of salary cap space to just carry into the season in case they needed, maybe there's an injury that happens. Maybe they make a trade. They like to have a little bit of wiggle room when it comes to the cap when the season starts. But yeah, Sam, I'm with you. It's definitely done, but we'll always have the memories of talking about Jair Alexander to the Ravens. And whether now their next move is an edge rusher, I see Zadarius Smith here for a lot of people. I think that out of all of the options available, Jair Alexander on some level of not the deal he was on in Green Bay, if they cut him, that would have been probably number 1. I think Stephon Gilmore, Rasul Douglas are probably in that second tier of guys you would prefer to bring in over Chidobe Awuzie. But Awuzie is not far off from that when he's healthy whatsoever. He was very good for Cincinnati before he tore his ACL. I know it was up and down for him in Dallas, definitely. But he is a guy that, again, at a depth piece, on a depth move like that, you're not expecting the world, especially a minimum deal. The hope here is that Marlon Humphrey and Nate Wiggins can continue to build off of their year in 2024, and then Awuzie can come in and be a good complement to them, which Brandon Stevens consistently was not for them in 2024. He had his flashes, but it was a far cry from 2023. We knew they had to move on. It happened. But Brandon Stevens got, 3 years, 36 from the Jets, or somewhere in that money range. Getting Awuzie for 1 year at the minimum is a lot better. It's, first of all, better value. Second of all, I think he has the potential to be better than Brandon Stevens if he can stay healthy. I think if he stays healthy, it's a guarantee. That, to me, is the most important part here, as, everybody's now rushing you here outside to go get their tickets, season tickets for the Ravens, because Chidobe Awuzie is now in Baltimore. But I still think that, in RNF, he can get his head around. We talked about that earlier. Appreciate you checking in. And Raven76B More is saying, look, this has been the thing with Baltimore. Vet players over the course of their careers, this has been the place. Not only defense, like Raven76B More says, but even offensively. Like, for example, DeAndre Hopkins is a guy that I think he will have. I don't think he's going to be a 1,000-yard season, but I think he will have a better year than he did in Tennessee last year. Well, in Tennessee and Kansas City last year. This is the place where vets go. Does it work out every single time? Of course not. No team has an 100% hit rate like that. If Baltimore did, it'd be wonderful, but that's just not how it works. But for vet players, this is the reputation, is if you had a down season, if you were injured, but you've shown ability in the past, and you want a place that'll take a chance on you to hopefully revitalize your career, then Baltimore is a good place to go. There are other organizations that can do it as well and that do it. But I think, to me, that for Awuzie, part of this factor is he probably could have gotten a little bit more on the open market. He probably could have signed a deal, like I said, maybe $5 million, $4 million, whatever that is, a little bit more than the minimum. But I think what it is Tennessee's still paying him $7.5 million. We talked about that earlier. And I think that it's kind of like the Russell Wilson deal last year with Pittsburgh, where Denver was paying a ton of money to Russell Wilson. And he essentially said, where is my best fit? Where can I go that I'm going to have an opportunity to start, an opportunity to compete, and an opportunity to be on a good franchise that can potentially win a Super Bowl? Now, obviously, it did not work out that way for Russell Wilson, but the fact that a team is still paying, or was still paying Russ that money, gave him the opportunity to pick and choose for a year and say, you know what, next year I'm going to go get my bag. And that is apparently what's going to happen. Russ is demanding, $20-30 million a year at this point, which it's a whole different conversation. Hashtag bring Russ back to Pittsburgh or go to Cleveland. I would love that either way. But now for Awuzie, it's kind of the same thing. You're getting paid $7.5 million from Tennessee. You have an opportunity to go to a team for a year where it's the minimum deal, still getting paid money, but you can now go to a team to say, hey, let's go win a Super Bowl. I'm going to help you out here by taking the minimum. Let's go do this thing. And if he has a great year, then he can go maximize his value in the next offseason. That, I think, is what happened here. And I think that for me, that's why this is such a good move, because it's all calculated out by Eric DeCosta. And coming up, we're going to be talking about how this not only impacts other guys in their corner room, but also TJ Tampa. We'll talk about Jalen Armour-Davis. But what about their draft? That's going to be really intriguing as well. Stay tuned. We got a lot coming your way on this live instant reaction edition of Locked On Ravens. Locked On Ravens, we are back here on Tuesday, coming up right at 6 p.m. Eastern time. Live editions of the show. I love doing these lives. We go live after every Ravens game, but obviously we only get 17 of those plus, right? Hopefully plus 3 or 4 more in the postseason. But now, with these big moves, or somewhat big moves, we get to do them a little more often during the offseason, which is really exciting. So appreciate everybody for tuning in and making us a part of your day. We had an episode come out with former Ravens receiver Qadri Ismail this morning about the Ravens making a big salary cap move, a really savvy one to help out with their situation. You should have checked that out, and be sure we're here for you every single weekday, Monday through Friday. Plus, we have some bonus episodes on the weekends when the headlines permit. We also, again, have these live episodes whenever the Ravens play or whenever there is a piece of big news. I think that now TJ Tampa and Jalen Armour-Davis, you're not going to rely on them as much with Chidobe Awuzie in. I think TJ Tampa has a lot of potential, but I think it was the smart move to bring in a veteran to be that shield to say, well, if TJ Tampa's not going to work out, or if he gets injured, or if one of these guys goes down, depth is always good. Cornerback depth is always great. Always great. So we know that for the Ravens, they have had seasons derailed by cornerback injuries. I mean, I'll never forget that 2014 season when that was the team of destiny that were going to win the Super Bowl that year. You could not convince me otherwise. If they had a healthy cornerback room where they weren't starting Rashod Melvin and they had like 8-9 corner injuries that year, that derails seasons. You want to have as much corner depth as possible. I mean, they were a corner injury away from signing you and I to deals like that. That's how bad it got that year. You don't want that to happen. So minimum signing depth gives you the flexibility to go a couple of different ways, whether it's adding an early corner in the draft. You can sign another vet like Gilmore, Sante Samuel, Rasul Douglas, whatever that is. You can never have enough of it. Never have enough. I see Cam is in the chat here. Let EDC cook in a draft. Can't wait to see what he does. I talked about this on 105.7 with Bob and Vinny this afternoon. I think that Baltimore now, and this was before the signing actually happened, but the Ravens aren't going to be pigeonholed in anything now. Literally anything. The only position that I think is an absolute big need for them, well, there are two actually. Edge is one of them, most definitely. Edge is one you got to look at. But I also think that guard and safety, and okay, so maybe four positions. But my thing is you have all those options, and it's not like you have such a glaring hole everywhere that you have to say, okay, if Ronnie Stanley had been gone, a lot of people would be calling for an offensive tackle in the first round. But now you have the flexibility to say, okay, maybe it is a corner if the pick is there. Maybe it is a safety. Maybe it is a D lineman or an edge or whatnot. So I feel like Eric DeCosta with 11 picks, he has the options to move up, to move down, to stay put. There's going to be a lot of conversation about what he ends up doing and how he ends up maneuvering around, because we know Eric DeCosta loves working the phones. You know, he loves taking as many swings as possible. Man, I feel like there's a lot to look forward to in the draft. I see, Cam, does this mean Stevens is gone? Well, he's gone to the Jets. I mean, if you're talking about like the turning head days not being there, if those days are over, yes, Chidobe Awuzie can turn his head around for the football. And I think that it's going to be a great sight to not really have to see that anymore of, you know, Brandon Stevens not being able to turn his head around for the ball. What does it mean for Ardarius Washington? I still think Ardarius comes back. I know it's a little iffy right now in terms of, you know, they offered him the right of first refusal, so there's no draft pick attached to that. I mean, I just don't see a way to let him leave. It'd be a travesty and honestly a pretty big mistake if he did. And yeah, look at this. We're breaking news on Locked On Ravens. Cam didn't even know Brandon Stevens went to the Jets. We're breaking news on this show. So yes, Brandon Stevens, Cam, was 3 years, $36 million. Happened the first day of free agency. So he's been gone for a little while now. I think for me, this is a better move for Baltimore because it fits what they need. They need the floor of Awuzie more than they need the ceiling of Stevens. That just to me is what it is. I think Stevens is a guy that if he can get back to 2023, he's a better player than Chidobe Awuzie. But you can't take that risk on a team that's competing. You can't do it. So that is what it is. And John, I appreciate you providing context here. Awuzie PFF grades, 58.4 run defense, 80.4 overall, 64.4. Oh, no, sorry, I read it wrong. Coverage is 58.4, run defense 80.4, overall 64.4. I didn't get into it yet, John. I appreciate you bringing it up. Yeah, and again, he was injured. I mean, he only played in 8 games. He came back. I think he had a pick in his first game back, if I'm not mistaken. But again, it's average. Like, he's solid in run defense. He can come up. He's a physical player. I just think, to me, you want to take a guy in Awuzie that does have that potential if he can stay healthy. And this is also a thing right here, an angry Ravens fan, saying Awuzie had a bad secondary with him in Tennessee. It could be 68-72 here. And plus the fact that Tennessee, I think that their pass defense overall, let me look at actually overall stats for Tennessee Titans football. Let's go to Pro Football Reference. Look, we're doing live research over here on Locked On Ravens. In 2024, Tennessee's pass defense wasn't well, actually, it was top 10. They were 9th in the league in pass defense according to net yards per attempt. They give up the second least yards. Now, that obviously has to do with some context as well, as teams were passing on Tennessee a little bit more. They were number one in terms of attempts thrown on them last season. But it is a matter of who's around you and what your role is. So, again, if you're talking John saying 300 snaps or so, if that's the threshold for Awuzie in a lesser role where he can have less pressure on him and kind of just play his game, I think that that's a really solid signing for them. 373, John clarifies there. And yeah, RNF, we're usually 6 a.m., but the live shows, when it happens, it happens. So when those things break, we try to go live as soon as possible over here on Locked On Ravens. But yes, our regularly scheduled programming is 6 a.m. Eastern time. We have Anthony Davis in the chat, the brow himself, Dallas Mavericks star. Anthony Davis saying, I think we get a good edge in the first round. They're going to guard in the second. I could see that. I could also see them taking a safety in the first 2 rounds if a corner presents itself. But that's the beauty of this, is with what's next for Baltimore, they might be able to fill out their roster over the next couple of weeks with a signing here or there, a vet guy. Maybe it is an edge. I still think that Azeez Ojulari would have been really good in Baltimore off the deal that he got, but that ship has sailed. I think for me now, Baltimore can say, oh yeah, okay, the best edge here is the guy on our board. We're going to take him. Or, oh, we have this guard highly rated. He's our top guard. Let's take him. Or, oh, how about this? Here's a safety that we really like. We're going to take him. There's not any set right answer for how the Ravens go about their draft in a month. And I think that's how the Ravens land these prospects. Because I say this example with Nate Wiggins and Roger Rosengarten all the time, right? I say this all the time, where Nate Wiggins, he was their top corner on their board. And all the offensive linemen that I believe had first-round grades, at least for me, they were taken. So instead of trying to force it and either take Rosengarten in the first round or Kingsley Suamataia, like one of these guys, they said, all right, we're going to take our best guy, our best corner on our board. We're not going to force a second-round grade in the first round. Essentially, it was BPA for them. Still a need. Corner was still a need for them, but still, it was BPA at the time for them. And then their mindset was going to approach in the second round of, all right, let's go and see who's available for us when we get to our pick. Baltimore obviously makes the move for Roger Rosengarten, and they get the best of both worlds. If you pigeonhole yourself, a lot of teams do, they say, okay, for example, like the quarterback position. Shedeur Sanders, I talked about this on Locked On NFL today with Tony Wiggins, who's my guy. He made me be the GM for the top 5 teams in the draft. So Tennessee, Cleveland, go down the list. For Cleveland, I took Abdul Carter instead of Shedeur Sanders because, yes, they don't have a quarterback right now. But I'm not forcing Shedeur Sanders if I don't think he's the franchise guy. And I know that some teams do, some teams don't. I think you take the best player available. If Cam Ward is gone, yeah, it's Abdul Carter at 2. I took Abdul Carter instead of Shedeur Sanders because I'm not forcing that pick if I don't think Shedeur Sanders is my quarterback of the future. But some teams do that. Baltimore has a history of not doing that for the most part, which I think is why they have been so successful. And yeah, Cam, this is my breakout pick for the year. Tavius Robinson. He is I had Matabike, and then I had, I think, Travis Jones last year. Tavius Robinson is my pick for breakout Raven, 1,000%. So look, I think overall it's a move that, look, if you're not blown away by it, I don't blame you. It's not like the biggest move in the world, but I think for the replacement of Brandon Stevens, someone who is a solid vet, if he stays healthy, he can turn his head around for the ball. That's the first and foremost thing. It is a solid depth signing that I think, again, for the minimum, that's a fine move. That's a fine move. So to me, it's a addition that I don't think is necessarily going to make or break the Ravens' Super Bowl chances. I still think this corner room is far from complete. I still think that you could see 2 or 3 guys, whether that is veteran signings, trades, or you even want to dive into some of the draft picks that we could get into. All of that, there's an impact, right? There's an impact that these guys can make, but I do think that the impact that Chidobe Awuzie can make is bigger than what Brandon Stevens can make if everything goes the way that I expect it to, which is Brandon Stevens does bounce back a little bit from what we saw in 2020, 2024, but I don't think he reaches his full ceiling. Meanwhile, I think Awuzie is able to hit his floor. And that ceiling, while I think it is less than Stevens, it's not to the point where it's going to be this massive detrimental thing if both guys hit their ceiling. So I see Hometown saying Von Miller, maybe. I don't know. Cheap 1-year deal. I'm not sure how that would go. But yeah, Cam saying lower moves are important than the people think, especially in the dog days of the season. Depth is how you fill out your roster. You can have all the star power you want to, but if you don't have depth surrounding your stars, if those stars get injured, you're in a bad spot. If a star doesn't pan out, you're in a bad spot. So that's all how it goes. And Ryan saying, Kevin, if you were in EDC's shoes, the available offensive lineman didn't make sense at 27. Would you take Starks, Imanwari, or an edge guy like Scourton, or D-line disruptor like Derrick Harmon? It's a good question. I see Ravens 76 be more saying Calais Campbell. If they sign Calais Campbell, I would probably be against them taking a D lineman in the first round. I'd probably go Starks or Imanwari. I'm not sure either of those guys will be there at 27, but I just think that it's the Kyle Hamilton problem. It's a good problem from 2 years ago, or 3 years ago now, which was, at the end of the day, Hamilton's the best player on your board. You figure out the rest later. The Ravens do need a safety. I think that there's a misconception, and, I have said it on the show here if you've listened to me in the past. I just think for me, the fact that Kyle Hamilton is there, that's one of your guys. You also have our Darius Washington, who, again, hopefully they're able to come to an agreement there. That's fine. If you even want to factor him in, that's okay. The Ravens defense is at its best when Kyle Hamilton can move all around. They had to move him back out of necessity last season. That is what it was. But if he can move all the way around and you can use him as your chess piece, your Swiss Army knife, that is when this Ravens defense is at its best. So if you can take another guy like a Starks, Imanwari, and those obviously there are different skill sets, but the point stands. 3 safety rotation is so key for this team because it means that Kyle Hamilton can do his thing. So a ball hawk does make sense. I see Cam saying that as well. So that's where I am with that situation. But I appreciate everybody for tuning in today to the live show a little later on the actual instant reaction part. But hey, we still got it in. It still worked out for us here. And Cam, appreciate the kind words. Always bringing the best Ravens content. 365, 24/7. We are 5 days a week plus more on Locked On Ravens. So on the way out, hit the like and subscribe button in video form. Follow along in audio form. We're going to be back here tomorrow, 6 a.m. Eastern time. We'll be breaking down this move a little more. We'll actually have Tyler Rowland from Locked On Titans on, my colleague, to discuss what he saw from Awuzie last year and what he thinks the fit is in Baltimore as well. So be sure to stay tuned, hit the like and subscribe button on the way out in video form and audio form. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.